Is the dollar in trouble, guys? To give you the short answer, yes, the dollar is in trouble. The question is it in trouble right now, or is the dollar going to run into the big problems a little bit further down the line? Over the past month, we've seen a lot of action with the dollar. We've seen the dollar crashing on the dollar index, recently falling below 100. We've seen foreign investors selling out their US treasuries and moving into gold, which is a sign that maybe the world is looking to move towards a different system, moving away from the dollar. So we're going to get into all this dollar drama and where the dollar is going in this video. Before we do get into it, please make sure to like the video and also subscribe to the YouTube. Really appreciate your support. I'm also going to put a QR code down below for a Bitcoin tip. So if you want to support the channel, feel free to leave me a little tip. Now let's get into it. Recently, the dollar has been crashing, guys. We have seen foreign investors, foreign nations moving out of the US dollar, moving out of US treasuries, moving out of US stocks in response to these tariffs that the Trump administration has put on the world. And we can see this dollar crash very clearly in a chart of the DXY, the dollar index. So let's take a look at that now. This chart shows the dollar index over the past month, and as you can see, it has been crashing as we've entered April. The dollar index was around 104. It is now under 100. And this makes you think, is the world trying to speed up a move away from this dollar system? The dollar system has been around for quite a while. It started back in 1944 when we had the Bretton Woods Agreement, which pegged the US dollar to gold, and it pegged all these other currencies around the globe to the US dollar. So we had this gold-backed system for a while. It lasted till around 1971, but the problem with this system is that there were so many claims for gold, claims that outnumbered the actual amount of gold that was out there. And it basically became this credit-based system where it was difficult to keep track of where the gold really was because everyone was just trading these claims, but the gold wasn't really moving. It was unclear how much gold was really out there, and it just kind of didn't really work, right? And when people wanted to basically withdraw their gold from the US to get the gold that they believed was theirs, the US really just didn't have all that gold. So in 1971, we saw the gold standard end. We've still maintained this dollar system as we've gone throughout the decades, and the USA has embraced this role of being the world reserve currency, although it seems like it has been somewhat of a burden. But I really think that when the USA and the world went off the gold standard in 1971, this was kind of the beginning of the end for this dollar system because money became backed by nothing, right? Really, when we look at the dollar, when we look at other fiat currencies, they're only backed by trust. And that trust is eroding, and it's eroding faster and faster every day as governments have proven that they just don't know how to handle the money, right? Governments always spend more than they make, and it leads to deficits, it leads to debt accumulation, which ultimately leads to currency failure in the end. And we're getting closer and closer towards that point. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot of countries starting to hedge out of the dollar, to hedge out of US treasuries and US assets, because they can see that this train is coming to a stop at some point here, right? The problem with having the world reserve currency is that you have to supply your currency to the world. And that means that you have to operate in a trade deficit. So if we look at the United States, who has the world reserve currency in the dollar, the USA has been constantly operating in a trade deficit, which means that we are importing more than we are exporting. So we have all our US companies do all their production in these different countries, and we import all those goods and services, and then we export those dollars to the rest of the world. And this allows the the dollar to be used in trade and for pricing commodities, pricing energy, and it allows the dollar to be the world reserve currency. As we flood the world with all these dollars and all this dollar demand is created as different countries look to settle trade and price things in dollars, this basically pushes the price of the dollar up against other currencies, right? There's all this global demand for the dollar because it is the world reserve currency. And this means that the dollar gets stronger and the currencies in these other countries get weaker compared to the dollar. And this basically makes it cheaper for these other countries to produce goods and services, and it makes it more expensive for us to produce these goods and services in the US. So that's a big reason, really the main reason why US companies like Apple do a lot of their production in other countries, in places like Asia, in places like Vietnam and China, because they're able to do this production a lot cheaper. Whereas if they did it in the United States, it would be a much higher expense. So this whole situation is what we call Triffin's dilemma. Now let's talk about some of the reasons for why the world is looking to move away from the dollar. I think the main obvious reason why the world is looking to move away is because the world can see the writing on the wall with this system. As I've mentioned many times on this channel, the US is over $36 trillion in debt. We're running trillion-dollar deficits. The interest on debt expense has gone above $1 trillion. And it's clear to me that this is not sustainable, right? This is just going to lead to the debt growing faster and faster. It's going to lead to more inflation. And the world is not stupid. They know how this works, right? They know that the more you become indebted, the closer you are to currency failure. And I think what we're seeing right now is a lot of countries are slowly moving out of dollar assets in preparation for a transition to a new system. And one area where we can see this is with China. China has significantly cut down their US Treasury holdings over the past decade. If we look back to 2013, China had 1.32 trillion in US Treasuries. And currently in 2025, as of the latest numbers I've seen, they have around 760 billion in US Treasuries. So they've cut down their US Treasury holdings by half. And I think that's for multiple reasons, but I think one of the main reasons is that China probably realizes that this dollar system is not sustainable and it's going to come to an end at some point. And I think the whole world is realizing that, and they're starting to shed off some of their US assets. And what are they moving into? They're moving into gold. They're moving into gold because the world is preparing for a transition. And who knows, maybe the world thinks that we're going to move back to a gold-backed system. I don't really think that's going to happen because, like we saw when we previously had the gold standard, this is a credit-based system. It's very difficult to keep track of the actual gold, and it just turns into a system where people are trading claims and they're not trading the real asset. And that's why I'm a big believer in Bitcoin, because Bitcoin has fast settlement. I think that a Bitcoin-backed system, especially where we're at in the internet era, makes a lot more sense. The fact that you could actually send the Bitcoin around across the globe pretty fast, to me, that would make a lot more sense in the present day over a gold-backed system. But we have seen all these countries moving into gold because gold has been the safe haven asset for a very long time. And when there's uncertainty out there and people can sense a transition, this is a place where they move to. Another major reason why the world is looking to move away from the dollar is because the USA has weaponized the dollar. We've seen this recently with these tariffs. The USA is trying to basically flip the world order and say, hey, we don't want to be the customer anymore. We want to be the producer. And the world is not happy about that, right? And the world has been selling out of US assets in response to this. The world has been selling out of US stocks. The world has been selling out of the US dollar, the US treasuries, because the world is not happy, and the world thinks that the US is maybe abusing its power a little bit. And the thing is, the rest of the world does hold some power over the US because the rest of the world holds these US dollars and these US treasuries and these US assets. So the rest of the world can crash the dollar if the rest of the world wants to. Now, the thing is, the rest of the world doesn't really want to crash the dollar because they want to keep selling to the US, right? They want to maintain their exporter status. And if the dollar crashes and all these exporter countries see their currencies shoot up in price against the dollar, that's going to make exporting more expensive. So it's kind of a weird dilemma. And really, just the dynamics of this whole fiat system are so weird to me. And it's funny how the rest of the world doesn't like the dollar, but they also want to keep the dollar priced higher than their local currencies. So it's just all weird to me. We also saw what happened a couple of years ago after this Russia-Ukraine conflict broke out. We saw the US put sanctions on Russia, and the US froze these Russian assets, these dollar-denominated assets that were being held in the United States. And from what I saw, it was $300 billion worth of assets. So that just sent a message to the world that, hey, your US assets, especially the ones that are being held in the United States, aren't really yours, right? And the world saw that, and I think the world realized that, hey, we need to reduce our dependence on the dollar. We can't be too heavy in these assets because if we ever piss off the United States, then they can just freeze our assets and we're shit out of luck. So I think that's another major reason why we're seeing people move out of US treasuries and into gold. Not to mention the fact that gold has been outperforming these assets. US treasuries really haven't been performing that great. Another thing we've seen is this BRICS movement, right? All these countries are looking to move towards a different system. If you're not familiar with BRICS, it stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and there's other nations getting involved. And basically, all these nations are working together to reduce dollar dependence. They're looking to settle trade in local currencies. We know that Russia and China are settling trade in assets that are not dollar assets. They're settling it in local currencies or something else like gold or Bitcoin. And the rest of the world is kind of looking to do this as well and reduce this dollar dependence. Now, there has been some talk of a common BRICS currency that could be formed to kind of rival the dollar and the dollar system. But I don't really think this is going to happen. For one, I just don't see all these power-hungry nations really working together and being able to coordinate this new currency. Like, who's going to control it? Who's going to be in charge? That's, going to be difficult for them to figure out. And I just don't think it will really work. I think you'd run into some of the same issues that you have with the current system. So I don't think that's going to happen, but there's been talks about a BRICS currency being formed that would be backed by commodities like gold and oil and other things. So the world is signaling that they want to reduce dollar dependence and move towards an alternative system. Now the question is, what does that system look like and what is the timing of this transition? One of the reasons for why it may take longer than people think for this dollar system to collapse and for us to move into something else is because there really isn't a great alternative out there currently. I think something like Bitcoin is a great idea, and I do think that Bitcoin is going to be a base layer for a new system, but I don't think it's quite ready yet. We still need to see these payment layers being built out on top of Bitcoin, and we really aren't seeing Bitcoin being used as a medium of exchange. And in order for Bitcoin to be the base layer for a new system, we really need to see people exchanging Bitcoin and using that system. And we aren't really seeing that yet. We're just seeing a lot of people investing in Bitcoin and holding it, right? It's not really being transacted that much. I do think if I had to bet, I think that's what's going to happen, but I think it could take a while. Now, with that said, the more this dollar system continues to weaken and the more the cracks start to show, the more we see inflation, the more incentivized people are to build out this system on top of Bitcoin and create an alternative faster. So I think we will continue to see this dollar system sort of bleed out. People will continue to move out of these dollar assets, and that will lead to the failure of the system sort of accelerating and a new system being built. It'll lead to that accelerating as well. But when we look at global liquidity, when we look at the U.S. Treasuries market, there's around 25 trillion in U.S. Treasuries outstanding, I believe, out in the world. And when we look at the second largest currency, the euro, there's only 1 to 2 trillion treasury euro bonds outstanding in the rest of the world. So I definitely don't think we're going to see another fiat system replace the dollar system, because you're just going to run into this same problem with Triffin's dilemma, where the world reserve currency holder sort of sees their, it just leads to failure over time. It leads to the economy weakening, it leads to a lower GDP, and it just leads to the currency inflating away. Now, we have seen the world selling out of US assets and into gold, and as I mentioned before, the gold price has been skyrocketing. So could we maybe move back to a gold-backed system? I would say it's unlikely. There's a reason that this system failed before, and it's because this system just turns into a credit-based system, because gold is not very portable, right? It takes time and energy to move gold across the globe, and because of that, it just turns into this system where people are trading claims for gold instead of gold. And that's why I think this Bitcoin system is much more likely. As I mentioned, because Bitcoin has this instant settlement, right? You could send Bitcoin across the globe and it can settle in a couple of minutes. And for that reason, it doesn't have to be this credit-based system. And I really think, as we're seeing with the current credit-based system we're in right now, it really doesn't work, right? So I think that is the most likely outcome, and I'm really excited to see what people are going to continue building on top of Bitcoin. And if we do get more investment in this, Bitcoin environment, and people do continue to build on top of this decentralized base layer, I think it's going to look pretty cool. And who knows, we could transition to this new system faster than people think. So I think there's two things to think about. You think about the collapse of the dollar system and what's happening there, and what's being built on this Bitcoin system and how fast we can get that up and running and kind of transition the world into this better decentralized system where we move away from government money, because clearly it doesn't work. So that's going to wrap it up for this video. I think that the dollar is screwed in the long term. In the short term, things are pretty volatile with all these tariffs going on. I think that we are going to see the government come in and provide QE, provide liquidity to the markets, because they have to. We know that the US needs to refinance a ton of debt this year. And in order to do that, I think that they're going to have to do some QE. And when that happens, I think we're going to see other assets rip up higher, and we're just going to see the dollar continue to depreciate away. So as I've mentioned, I'm not a big fan of US Treasuries, especially long-term US Treasuries. And as the future of the dollar starts to look more grim and grim, I think we'll see more people moving out of these long-term treasury bonds, and we'll see the yield skyrocket. So I would not be looking to invest in long-term treasuries. This is not financial advice. Do your own homework, but I just would not be willing to bet on the dollar system for the next 20 to 30 years. That's going to wrap it up. If you didn't like and subscribe, please make sure to do that now. Really appreciate your support. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.